birdman from Trumble woods. He heard a haunting, melodious sound, but he couldn't figure out what it was or where it was coming from. That was kind of driving him crazy. It got closer and closer. He was driving down a country road on a car with no wheels. And that sound got increasingly louder. Suddenly the car disappeared, and he was walking through a meadow, frustrated that he couldn't find the origin of that beautiful sound. And to get away from the sun, he ducked under the tree. And the low, thick branches kind of obstructed his view, and he tried to push them out of the way and realized that he was actually pushing the sheets from the bed away from his face. He opened his eyes slowly and discovered that he was in his small bedroom. It had all been a dream. So he took a deep breath, he got up, and he walked into the bathroom to wash up. After that, he went into the kitchen where a sink filled with dirty dishes awaited him. There was a coffee maker on the counter, and the glass pot was stained from the time he forgot to shut it off and it burned. He picked it up, rinsed it out in the sink, and filled it with tap water. While the coffee was brewing, he picked up the remains of a corn cake he had baked a few days earlier and examined it for evidence of mice. It looked untouched, so he cut off a piece, placed it on a paper plate, and put that in a small microwave and set it for 15 seconds. Then he went back to pour his coffee. And he pulled up a small two-person table against the window, and there he sat, sipping his black coffee and munching on that corn cake, looking out at nature. His name was William Grant, and he lived alone in a small cabin in Trumble woods about 3 miles out of the village of Crandall. In his little world, he had everything he needed. Most of the things he ate came from his small garden, or the things he would forage from nature. Whenever there was something that he couldn't grow or borrow from nature, as he called it, he would walk the 3 miles to Crandall, sell a few of his beautiful birdhouses, get some money, get whatever he needed, and leave quickly without interacting with people. He sat at his table, sipping his coffee, and looking out at the lilac bushes. They were filled with these glorious purple spikes. And then he heard that melodious sound he had heard in his dream. And then he saw it. Right there on a beautiful lilac was a rose-breasted grosbeak. That's what he had heard. Just yesterday, he saw a pair of buff-sided towhees. And it wouldn't be long until the Baltimore Orioles returned. The bluebirds had started nesting in the birdhouses already. The sight of the grosbeak made him smile. And he walked out holding his coffee mug that he had had forever with his black coffee, walking out to smell that lilac-infused air. Around his cabin, just about every tree was adorned with one of his beautiful birdhouses. This place made him happy. This was paradise. If he had ever been broken, this is where he had healed. The sound of the birds, the smell of the flowers almost put him into a hypnotic state. That's when he got careless and he tripped on a root and he dropped the coffee mug that fell on a rock and shattered to many pieces. William picked up a few of the pieces and he sighed. Now he would have to walk to the village of Crandall and replace it. And since he was out of cash, he would have to sell a few of his birdhouses. So he went to his workshop, picked up 4 brightly colored birdhouses, tied them with twine so he can strap them on his shoulders, and he filled a couple of baggies with his homemade trail mix, and he put that in a backpack with a thermos of his cinnamon apple cider. And then he set out on his long trip to Crandall. The solitary figure walked slowly. Now, he had a scraggly gray beard and long, matted salt and pepper hair. The clothes that he wore was torn, faded jeans, an old t-shirt with some kind of music logo on it, and a well-worn fatigue jacket he had picked up at the Salvation Army. As he walked slowly, he would stop to smell the flowers and listen to the sounds of the birds and try to identify the species. He walked very slowly. He wanted to get to the village, sell his birdhouses, replace his mug, get a few things, and leave as quickly as possible without interacting with anyone. People made him feel uncomfortable. People were cruel and judgmental. In his little paradise, no one judged him. No one told him what he could or could not do. People just made him feel uncomfortable. The only thing that he missed about people was human touch. You see, he hadn't touched or been touched by another person since his wife, Rebecca, died 15 years earlier. They had the perfect life together. They were so happy in their little cabin in the Trumble woods, and she was just like him. She loved and respected nature, and she was content being surrounded by trees, birds, and flowers. While he tended the garden and worked on his birdhouse creations, she would keep the cabin spotless and sewed everything that they needed. And she was a great cook. Whatever he brought in from the garden or the woods, she would turn into a great meal. And her corn cake was to die for. And she didn't care much for it, so that corn cake would last him about a week or so. He had to make sure the mice didn't get to it before he did. Yes, well, their life was perfect. It was peaceful and calm. They had everything they needed in nature, but more importantly, they had each other. But one day, life changed for William Grant. You see, Rebecca fell ill, and she couldn't get out of bed. She lay there shivering, and she tried to get up, but she couldn't. He gave her some herbal tea that he concocted, but he got even worse. He had no choice but to walk those 3 miles to the village and find a doctor. When he got there, he went straight to the storefront that he had seen on one of his visits, and there was a shingle above the door that read, Robert French, MD. He turned the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. He knocked on the door, but there was no answer. An elderly lady walking by with the help of a cane said, if you're looking for Dr. French, you'll find him at the diner. He takes lunch about this time. William nodded a gesture of thanks, and he headed in the direction of the Crandall Diner. The place was bustling, and it had the strong smell of fried chicken, which turned his stomach. You see, he had been a vegan since he was 15 years old. The year his mother died and he was left all alone in the world. While he was grieving, he had an epiphany. He realized that he was no more important than other creatures in nature. And he vowed then and there that he would never harm or consume a creature that was once alive and breathing like he was. He scoped the noisy diner where the patrons were eating and laughing and talking, and he saw a man that was wearing glasses and sported a short, well-trimmed red beard. And he approached carefully and asked if he was Dr. French. The man let out a hearty laugh and said in a loud voice, do I look like a doctor? No. You want that gentleman over there. And he pointed to an obese man who was sweating profusely. His pale face was dripping with perspiration, and in his hand he held a gigantic burger of some kind that he ate with gusto. William approached cautiously and asked if he was the doctor. The man looked at him crossly, didn't stop chewing. Then after a while he said, can't you see I'm having my lunch? I'll be back in my office at around 2:30. I'll see if I can squeeze you in between patients. That is, if you have the ability to pay. William told him softly that it was his wife who was very sick back at their cabin. The doctor looked him up and down and said, I've seen you before. You're that fella who sells those birdhouses in front of the post office every now and then. I'll tell you what. You don't need any money. Make me 10 of those birdhouses and I'll see what's wrong with your wife. But I can't get there until tonight because I have quite a few appointments. Here, handing him a piece of paper. Write down the directions to your place and I'll try to be there around 7. William wrote down the directions. He drew a small map and he wanted to tell him that he should go sooner, that he should hurry, but he was intimidated by the large man, so he just nodded and walked away. Walking back home, he walked faster than ever. He heard the beautiful sound of the birds, but he couldn't concentrate on that. He was too busy thinking about Rebecca. How was she feeling? How terrible she must be feeling. He got back to the cabin, he entered and he called her name. There was no answer. She was lying in bed with her eyes closed. He touched her hand and it felt like fire. He embraced her and it felt like he had opened an oven door with a set on broil. She opened her eyes, just looked at him. He put her down gently and he went to the kitchen to get a basin filled with ice water, and with a washcloth he tried to cool her down. She began to shiver and he covered her with a blanket and she fell asleep. And then he left and he went outside to the garden to gather a few things to make her some soup. And when he came back in, he washed those vegetables in the sink, and as he was washing them, he looked out the window and the sun was setting. Well, he put the vegetables in a pot of boiling water, and when he was finished putting some salt and some herbs and spices, he went to check on her again. And she felt cooler to the touch. So he went back to the kitchen and he poured a bowl of the soup, put a couple of ice cubes in it, and came back. He sat on the bed and he shook her gently and said, Becca, wake up. I made you some soup. She just looked up at him. She tried to speak, tried to say something, but the words didn't come out. He touched her and she felt like she was on fire again. So he just held her. He held her. And it felt like the heat that radiated from her body made him feel so uncomfortable, but it didn't matter. He must have held her for an hour or more. And then she opened her eyes slowly and tried to say something. He couldn't make out what it was, so he put his ear to her lips. She said, Bill, I love you. And she was gone. He couldn't let go of her body. He just held her. And he must have cried every possible tear he had. And then he put her down gently. And he lied down next to her. It was nighttime, but he couldn't sleep. His body was numb. In his mind, he cursed Dr. French and all of mankind. When the streaks of sunlight pricked his face like hypodermic needles, he reached out to touch her and she was cold and stiff. He wanted to scream, he wanted to die, but he knew what he had to do. So he went to the closet and he got her favorite dress, the pink one with the purple and yellow flowers that she had ordered from the catalog. And he put the dress on her and he kissed her cold lips. She was lying in bed looking as beautiful as ever. And then he walked outside and began to dig by her lilac bushes. Lilacs were her favorite flowers. She would cry at the end of the season when the lilacs began to die. As he dug that soft earth, he cursed. And he cursed Dr. French, and he wondered why that poor excuse of a human had not shown up at all. Perhaps he was too busy eating more animal flesh. So he dug and he dug, then he heard a beautiful song. And when he looked on a branch of a lilac, there was a pair of robins in the process of building a nest. And that song brought a peaceful calm to his soul. It was as if Rebecca was saying, I'm at peace. and I will always comfort you with the songs of nature. William Grant walked slowly to the village of Crandall, carrying his birdhouses. He just wanted to sell the birdhouses, get whatever he needed, and just leave. He did not want to deal with anybody. He didn't need people. But then he remembered what he missed about people. Human touch. Human touch. That thought made him feel lonely. I guess being solitary does have some drawbacks. He figured that simply that's the way it was going to be until he died, and he hoped it was soon. He got to the post office about noon. He put the birdhouses down and he taped the price tag on each one, $20. That's all he needed for each one. He reached into his backpack, got the trail mix and the cider, and he sat down and waited. And his mind drifted back to the time he came to the village looking for a doctor, but quickly he was able to block that thought out of his mind, and he began to think of other things, his garden and ways to deal with insects and animals. That's when he saw him. The man who had allowed Rebecca to die was walking in his direction. Dr. French was walking. Now, he hadn't seen this man in 15 years. He had avoided going by his office when he came to town. So he put his head down, pretending not to see him. Well, he walked right up to him, and he spoke. He says, "I've been hoping to run into you. You know, I'm sorry I couldn't make it to your house that night. But I tried to go about a month later, but I couldn't find the paper with the directions. I asked around. No one knew where you lived or even your name. They just called you the birdman from Trumble Woods, but no one could tell me where to find you. By the way, how is your wife?" William felt hate and rage become a ball in the pit of his stomach, and he said to his clenched teeth, "My wife died that night." The doctor's composure changed. You could see tears welling up in his light blue eyes. And he just said, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." And he wept openly. Then William said to him in a shaking voice, "Why didn't you come?" Then he shouted, "It's your fault she died!" The doctor's tears were falling like a boiling pot spilling out onto the stovetop. He just sat next to William without saying a word, looking straight ahead. Maybe he just couldn't speak. But after a long while, he spoke softly, still looking straight ahead, and he said, "That afternoon, while I was in my office, I was visited by a young army officer. And the news he brought me shattered my world. My only boy, my only son, Tommy, had been killed in Vietnam. I couldn't function after that. I couldn't see any more patients. It took me a long time to get on with life. I wasn't even sure I wanted to." William felt like someone had punched him in the throat. The lump in his throat was overwhelming. He couldn't speak. Then after a while, he mustered up enough courage to say, I'm sorry. What a terrible loss." But beyond that, he couldn't say anymore because he too was weeping. Dr. French reached out to him, but he recoiled at first. But then he also reached out to him. Both men embraced, and they wept together. William felt comfort in the arms of that doctor, and it was obvious the doctor felt comforted as well. William tried to bite his lip to see if he could stop crying, but no, he could not. Then he heard a beautiful melodious sound coming from a young sycamore tree in front of the post office. And when he looked on one of the low branches, there was a rose-breasted grosbeak. The doctor saw it too, and the two men managed a weak smile through their tears. And then the doctor put an arm around William, and the two of them walked away together.